Welcome to the podcast, folks. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. Hope everybody's having a great week. Before we get on to today's episode, let's get to today's sponsors. Jim Spenrath and the team over at Three Trees Tap and Kitchen. Man, they got a solid selection of beverages on the old tap. Of course, their new brewery from Siding 14 out of Ponoka to go alongside some local ones, Ribstone Creek at Edgerton, and of course, 4th Meridian here in Lloydminster. So if you're going down to have a beverage, I highly suggest one of those three. And if you're going to get a growler filled from Three Trees, of course, you can get anything on tap, including if you're a Guinness fan. I'm not this guy, but if you are, you can get that filled. If you're wanting to win a gift card, win some prizes, head over to their social media, interact with them. They've been giving out gift cards all year long to one lucky winner per week, so that's been pretty cool. And if you're going to take the Mr. or Mrs. out for a nice evening, I always suggest calling to book a reservation, 780-874-7625. Don't show up, and I'll be able to get a table like this guy. HSI Group, they are the local oil field burners and combustion experts that can help make sure you have a compliant system working for you. The team also offers security, surveillance, and automation products for residential, commercial, livestock, and agricultural applications. You know, I've mentioned on different episodes with Prophet River, their new building. Well, their new building is going to have an HSI security system on it. I've talked an awful lot about the Wade Gartner's building here that I'm out of with HSI and some of the cool technology they got there, and I look forward to seeing firsthand at Prophet River what HSI has got cooked up for them, because I can imagine a place like that is going to have some really cool tech moving forward. Of course, they use technology to give you that peace of mind so you can focus on the things that truly matter. Stop in today, 3902 52nd Street, or give Brody or Kim a call at 306-825-6310. Mac Construction, they've been doing business locally for over 12 years with over 100 homes completed. They are, of course, a design-build home custom home building operation that has specialized in constructing homes, cottages, RTMs throughout Lloydminster and communities. In addition, they also do extensive renovations to residences and light commercial work. If you're looking to build your dream house, head to macconstruction.ca and look no further. Jen Gilbert and team, for over 45 years, since 1976, the dedicated realtors of Coldwell Banker Cityside Realty have served Lloydminster and the surrounding area. They offer star power, providing their clients with 7-day-a-week access, because they know big life decisions are not made during office hours. We all know that. And did you know, when it comes to rental properties, they are the biggest licensed residential property management company in the city of Lloydminster. They deal with over 250 rental units. We're talking houses, apartments, and condos. They know home is truly where awesomeness happens. Coldwell Banker, Cityside Realty, for everything real estate, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Give them a call, 780-875-3343. Agland, of course, with harvest season in the rearview mirror, there might be a couple of farmers out there doing a couple things, but I think harvest is behind us for another season. Here's a little bit of Agland history. They started back in Lloydminster in 1957 as a John Deere equipment dealer with a staff of only 6. Now, 60-plus years later, they've got multiple locations, of course, Lloydminster, Vermilion, and St. Paul, and a staff of over 130. They sell and service, of course, John Deere products, but also Brent, Bobcat, Dangelman, and AA trailers. Here in Lloydminster, they're located on Highway 16 and Range Road 14 on the west side of town. My kids got looking, we were doing a little creeping on social media. They came across a gator, and in their words, they love side-by-sides, but I don't think I'm making quite enough money to get in there and buy one of those, but maybe you do. Hop on their social media to see what they're cooking with, or give them a call, 780-875-4471. If you're looking for any outdoor signage, the team over at Read and Write, they do all outdoor billboards. Of course, I talk about the wall coat, the frosted glass, the SNP logo. Just stop in today or give them a call, 306-825-5111. Gartner Management is a Lloydminster-based company specializing in all types of rental properties to help meet your needs, whether we're looking for a small office or 6,000 square foot commercial space. Give Wade Gartner a call, 780-808-5025, all right? If you're heading into any of these businesses, let them know you heard about them from the podcast. Now, let's get on to that T-Bar 1 tale of the tape. He graduated from Dalhousie Medical School in 2004, has been an emergency room doctor for 10 years. He maintains a business office in BC and has been a Locum Tenens Physician in rural Alberta hospitals since 2015. I'm talking about Daniel Nagase. So buckle up, here we go.
I'm Dr. Daniel Nagase, and welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Okay, welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr. Daniel Nagase. So first off, thank you, sir, for hopping on.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Now, hi, man, well, actually, first, let's do this. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself, maybe some of your credentials, that type of thing, so they can get a feel for who I'm talking to. How about we start there?
So before I started doing rural locum medicine in Alberta in 2015, I was an emergency doctor in Vancouver. So I've worked in all sorts of emergency departments, small ones, large ones, and I got a lot of experience under my belt and a lot of gray hairs on my head. And it hit the point where I thought, I need a change of lifestyle. So Alberta has quite a well-organized rural locum program where you just pick the weeks you want to work and what days you want to work, and you can schedule out your entire year 3 months at a time. So that really allowed me to have more freedom. I would work really hard for 3 weeks, and then I could get 2 weeks off, the last week of the month and the first week of the next month. So yeah, that's how I started doing rural medicine all over Alberta.
Why?
So from 2015 till now, that's what I've been doing.
Pardon the interruption, folks. Just quick note here. There's an upcoming conference October 22nd and 23rd, this Friday, Saturday in Calgary. It's called Meeting the Healthcare Challenge. They're discussing everything through COVID to any of the healthcare challenges the current healthcare system faces. Guest speakers include PCP leader Maxime Bernier, National Post author John Robson, Lieutenant Colonel David Redman, True North Independent Media Andrew Lawton, Dr. Daniel Nagase, and Danielle Smith. So for more information, go to freedomtalk.ca. You can sign up to travel to Calgary and go in person to the conference, or you can just sit at home and do it virtually. Like I say, go to freedomtalk.ca for more details. Okay? Now back to the show. Why is that something lots of doctors do, or is that just something I've never heard of? Why do I not hear more of this? Or maybe I just never paid attention. Maybe none of us paid attention before.
I think a lot of doctors do it somewhat. I've chosen to do this full time, which makes it a lot of driving around, a lot of going to different communities. But, I get to see all of Alberta, from the southern border in Milk River all the way up to Athabasca. So, it's a new country for me. It's a new province, and I get to see and I get to live in each spot where I go, and that's better than being a tourist. So
yeah, you get a little bit of an adventure each shift, is what you're saying.
Exactly, an adventure.
So where do you live full time then? You don't have to give me the exact address, but you're living in BC, yes?
I live in BC, and I have a place in Lethbridge in Alberta, and basically anywhere from Vancouver all the way to Lethbridge, that's where I live when I'm not working. So basically I live all over.
This is why the story is so, when I search your name, I get everything from you don't exist, and this is a fabricated story, to I don't even know, all the way, the full gambit. I've never seen, normally when you research any doctor, Daniel, you get oh, they live here, they work at this hospital, they've been blah, 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 blah. And when you search your name, this is why the story got flanned so quickly, right? Because it's so incredible, the story that you tell. But then it's not well, you just works at Lethbridge, right? Where you got your one place. By being a traveling doctor, all of a sudden it becomes very hard to nail you down to where you actually are. And people start writing some pretty crazy stuff about you.
But you know what? I think that's a good thing. And here's why. The controversy raises awareness, right? This whole media, for the lack of the better word, crap show, right? People making up stuff, calling me a non-entity. This type of thing, this type of back and forth really gets everyone focused on what I'm saying. And if what I was saying wasn't very important and very disturbing to the establishment, then no one would bother going to these extraordinary lengths to try and take me down. But they're searching for every excuse to discredit me. And that's because of the message I'm saying, that people need to know about ivermectin. People need to know what this COVID has done to medicine in their hospitals.
Well, can you lead us? I assume people have read the story or listened to the story of what you said on the steps out in Vancouver. But can you walk us through it so that people, if they have no idea who Dr. Daniel Nagase is, they can have an idea of what you saw?
So I went for the first time to the town of Rimbey, right? And every year I try to go to a town that I haven't been to before. So Rimbey was that town for 2021. And there was 3 COVID patients, 3 out of the 4 COVID patients on the COVID wing of the Rimbey Hospital had suddenly deteriorated overnight. And that's what the charge nurse, the nurse in charge, told me on Saturday morning when I started my set. So I was supposed to work there for 48 hours, from Saturday 8 a.m. till Monday 8 a.m. So because these 3 patients suddenly deteriorated, I was like, well, got to look into what I can do for them. And so I looked through their charts, and it looked like the only thing they were on were steroids. That's it. Nothing else was being done for them. So I go and I, put on the gown, the PPE, that yellow suit, and then I go and examine the patients. And I listen to their lungs and I talk to them and see how they're feeling, and yeah, they're not doing well. So I order blood tests, and I ask them, if you want to try ivermectin. And all 3 patients were like, yes, try something. It's better than doing nothing. And the one particular patient, she was really upset. She was praying to God the night before because she felt like she was just put into a corner to die. And, I have to say, from what I saw on the orders and what the doctor before me was doing for them, we weren't really doing much at all for her. So I put them on ivermectin, vitamins, antibiotics, and inhalers. Except the hospital didn't have any ivermectin, so they had to fax my orders over to Red Deer Central Pharmacy. And then Red Deer Central Pharmacy asked why the patients were giving ivermectin. And the charge nurse told Red Deer Central Pharmacy, it was because they were having COVID. And so the Red Deer Central pharmacist for that zone said, ivermectin is not to be given for COVID-19. And I said, well, that's your opinion, right? I've examined the patients. I've talked to the patients. They want to try ivermectin, and ivermectin is something that's reasonable to try. And the pharmacist was a little taken aback, so then he referred to the central pharmacy director, which is Dr. Gerald Lazarenko. So he's both a pharmacist and a doctor, and he's the head of pharmacy for all of Alberta Health Services. He's the pharmacy director for the province. So, again, he says, then there's no evidence for ivermectin. And they fax over a 69-page fax, 69 pages of what they think is condemnation of ivermectin. Except in that 69 pages, there was a 67-page report from Alberta Health Services from February 2nd, where they summarized the evidence up till February 2nd, 2021, for and against ivermectin. And that 67-page report had nothing but references showing how well ivermectin worked. The first 3 studies, starting on page 16 and 17 of that report, were studies where ivermectin created 0% mortality. The patient groups that got ivermectin all had 0% mortality, and that's 3 separate studies. And then there was other studies in that document that showed a 50% mortality reduction when there was severe COVID. So the charge nurse, she asked, well, Dr. Nagasi, they're not going to send us any ivermectin from Red Deer Central Pharmacy. What do you want to do? I said, well, if they're not going to send us any ivermectin, well, might as well put the patients on hydroxychloroquine. So I started them on hydroxychloroquine as well. And because the charge nurse knows the community better than I do, because this is my first time there, she asked me, well, do you want me to check with the local pharmacies, see if they have ivermectin? I said, for sure. You know, we're putting our patients on hydroxychloroquine for now, but, you know, if you find some ivermectin, then, you know, we'll get it from a local pharmacy. So it happened to be that one of the local pharmacies, the pharmacist did find some ivermectin, and it wasn't from his usual chemical supply. He had to get it from the agricultural supply. And then he went over to the co-op store. He checked to see if the bottle was the same chemical substance that patients would get, like human patients would get. And he thought, yeah, this looks like it's the right stuff. He bought the bottle from the co-op supply, took it back to his pharmacy and checked it again. And then he calls me up at the hospital, and this is Saturday evening. And he says, you know what? The stuff I found is the exact same stuff I would give my grandmother. It's the exact same stuff I would take myself. This is ivermectin. So I went to the pharmacy and I picked it up because he couldn't leave the pharmacy. He was busy. He had a full day. So as soon as I had a moment, I ran over to the pharmacy, picked up the ivermectin, and gave it to the patients. And then so somebody at the hospital didn't like the fact that the patients were getting ivermectin. And I don't know if it was because they saw that CBC report on horse paste, and they were all upset that, you know, patients were getting something that the CBC said, you know, they shouldn't be getting because it doesn't work for COVID-19. And they reported me. So then Saturday, I get a call from Dr. Jennifer Bestard, and she's the Central Zone Medical Director. And she tells me, I can't give the patients ivermectin. And I said, why not? She says, because it's not for the treatment of COVID-19. And I said, well, there's no side effects to ivermectin. It's been around for 40 years. It has fewer side effects than aspirin. It's one of the mildest medications you can get as far as, you know, side effects. You know, I think it's every patient's right to try it. She said, no, absolutely not. I was like, well, what if the patients have their own ivermectin, right? I'll give them their dose, their relative, when they go to visit them. They can carry the dose into the room, and the relative can hand it to the patient, and the patient can take it themselves. It's their own. She says, no, patient can't even take their own. You can't give the patient's, you know, husband or wife or son or daughter the ivermectin and have them handed off to them. Absolutely not. And I told her, well, then I'm going to have to put your name on their chart because you're not their doctor and you are overruling their care. And she couldn't say anything to that, right? Because as a patient, you should not have some doctor that you've never met changing the care you get without your consent. But that wasn't good enough. So by Sunday, I get a call, and I'm working in the ER, because you have to split your time between the ER and the ward when you're working in small hospitals, because usually you're the only doctor there. By Sunday, I get a phone call giving me from the same person, Dr. Jennifer Bestard, telling me I have 15 minutes to finish up all my medical duties and that I'm being relieved of my duties. I told her that's completely unreasonable, right? This was 1:45, and she told me that I had to finish my medical duties by 2 p.m. And I said, no, I have an emergency department full of people. This is dangerous. This is completely unreasonable. Anyhow, by 3 o'clock, another doctor showed up to relieve me of my duties. So then I'm no longer working. And she took over. And so, I didn't say this in my speech, but I asked the other doctor, Dr. Paula Burke, listen, you know what? Do you mind if I just sit in the corner here on the emergency doctor's area and just finish up my paperwork? And she says, no, you'll be in the way. I mean, there's plenty of space, but who am I to just start a conflict with one of the local doctors in the community? So I take my stuff, and there's only 2 doctors in the hospital now, me, and I'm not doing any work with patients, I'm just doing paperwork, and then Paula Burke, who is on the emergency side, taking over for all the patients that I've half worked out through, ordered blood tests, but we don't have the blood test results, started inhalers, started antibiotics, but again, they haven't been worked out to the point where I can decide whether they have to stay in the hospital or they're getting better and they can go home. So she's working through all the patients that I was formerly taking care of. And so I'm sitting in the corner charting away, and the unit clerk, this is a couple hours later, maybe around 5:30, the unit clerk says, I have a phone call. And I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. And it's from the facility medical director, Dr. Christine Ellis. And so she gets transferred to the phone in the doctor's side, and she says to me, I'm supposed to be out of the hospital. That I was told I was relieved of my medical duties and I had to leave the hospital. And I told Christine, I said, Dr. Ellis, that wasn't the agreement. Dr. Jennifer Bestard just said I had to end my medical duties as of 3 p.m. because I had told her it was totally unreasonable to give me just 15 minutes to finish up with my patients. And I told Dr. Ellis, if the zone medical director, the Central Zone Red Deer medical director, thought that I had agreed to leave the hospital as of 3 p.m., she should give me a call, because that certainly wasn't the conversation I had with her. And then so Dr. Ellis hangs up. No one else calls me for the next hour or so. And then the unit clerk comes over to the physician area again, and she says, you've got another call. It's Dr. Ellis again. And I'm thinking, well, tell her I'll call her back. I'll finish my paperwork, right? So about an hour and a half later, I'm done my paperwork. I call Dr. Ellis. She's the facility medical director at Rimbey. I call her back and I say, so what do you want to talk about? Because Dr. Jennifer Bestard did not call me back saying that I was expected to leave the hospital. I was just expected to stop my medical duties, stop taking care of patients. And she says to me, you realize that your presence there in the hospital is making people uncomfortable. And I said to her, why? Because I'm sitting in the corner, I'm not in anyone's way, and the only words I've said to anyone was to the unit clerk to tell her, listen, I'll call you back. And then she says to me, well, you have to understand after what you've done that people are uncomfortable. I said, what have I done? 2 of my 3 patients that had got ivermectin got better. They got significantly better, amazingly better. And the one patient who was headed downhill from the night before, she stopped heading downhill.
Can I
And I
ask
said to Dr. Ellis, yeah.
So when you look, like, how long ago was this? Like, how many months are we talking now?
This was September 11th.
Yeah.
This
so
was September 11th
what
and
is that?
September 12th.
Yeah. So a little over a month ago.
Yeah.
In all your years of being a doctor, did you ever think to go to, did you ever use veterinary medicine before? I'm just curious. I just, like, when you're doing that,
I
do you
use
go,
medicine. I use medicine.
uh,
A chemical is a chemical, right? There's no veterinary air. There's no veterinary water. It's water and air. The label you attach to the chemical doesn't change the chemical.
like,
That's how a scientist thinks. Okay, that's a scientist. This is science. We're not lawyers. We're not administrators. We're not accountants where we charge different prices for different things. I'm a doctor.
What I mean is,
Science.
yeah. Once again, you got way more credentials than I do on what medication, et cetera. I'm just curious if in your previous tenure as a doctor, you'd ever had to resort to getting the vet to prescribe you what you wanted because of roadblocks put in place that you weren't allowed to get what you wanted.
I've never had a vet prescribe anything.
So, isn't that
This is a pharmacist examining a chemical in a bottle and telling me that this is the same chemical a person would get. If a pharmacist says that, a licensed pharmacist,
I got
then
what you're
it's the
saying.
same chemical.
My brain heard a vet gave it to you, and what you're saying is a pharmacist gave it to you. It was just a different a different bottle essentially.
Yeah, it's a chemical. And I had another licensed pharmacist verify that it's the same chemical. Because I don't have a chemistry lab in the hospital emergency department where I can verify a chemical. That's a pharmacist's job.
Up until September, you're doing this all across Alberta? Like you're doing exactly what you've been doing, just bouncing around different places, correct? Like you hadn't taken a year hiatus. You'd been doing this up until this point?
Yeah, I was working all throughout 2020 and all throughout 2021.
Did you have to did you encounter roadblocks like this anywhere else, or did you not see anybody that needed this type of treatment?
I actually didn't see anyone. Like all of 2020, I saw maybe 3 or 4 COVID patients, only one of whom was in the hospital. This is in rural Alberta. So I don't know what the situation was in cities, but all of 2020, I saw less than the fingers that I have on one hand. Less than 5. I can barely remember. And then 2021, I saw way more vaccine side effects. People getting weird things happen to them. Things that I've only read about in textbooks. Things that aren't even in textbooks. Just absolutely bizarre conditions after the vaccine. And yeah, I saw about a dozen. March, April was when I saw the most of them. And that was up in northeastern Alberta, St. Paul. But
Where
yeah,
you
as far as like
where you sorry
acutely ill
where
with
you saw vaccine injuries, so to speak, or just conditions?
well, you know, my suspicion as an emergency doctor is it's related to the vaccine because of the timing, right? And it's not a problem related to the high blood pressure that the patient had for 20 years. Can I prove it? Not from the emergency department, right? Because you have to wait for some specialized tests to come in. And I refer these people on to specialists, get them CT scans. And in a couple cases, it shows blood clots, but then what caused the blood clots? Sometimes blood clots happen for no reason that we can figure out. But all of a sudden, I'm seeing it much more often. And in a time course that makes me suspect, well, the only thing that's changed with this person recently is that they had a vaccine. So, and that's the unusual thing of the double standard. If someone has something go wrong with them and they swab positive for COVID, COVID is automatically blamed as the cause. But if something unusual happens to a patient, or all of a sudden they start to have chest pains, or they have a mini stroke, and they had the vaccine a week before, then all of a sudden it's not related to the vaccine. You can't prove that it's not the vaccine. But if they swabbed positive for the COVID, it would have been blamed on the COVID.
Why
It's
then?
a completely ridiculous double standard.
Why then do we have what we have? We have, I mean, certainly you must have worked with some doctors that you thoroughly enjoyed or regarded or trusted or all the above. Why is it then that we have those men and women, not all of them, but a ton of them? I mean, Daniel, you're in, this is like, this is like heresy, right? Like this could get you burned at the stake. Sorry to go medieval on you. Um, you have, what do I keep getting told? 99% of doctors or 95% of doctors, medical staff, say this is the worst thing they've ever seen, that it is absolutely real. And by talking about it, like we're doing right now, we are.
So let me stop you right there.
Sure.
Any doctor who's telling you that this is the worst thing they've ever seen is full of crap. And if you want proof of that, all you have to do is I'll send you the link, and you can look up the stats on your own. And this is the overall mortality rate. Okay, and you can divide it as Canada as a whole, or you can look at it per province. Let me send this to you on the chat. And that link, that gets you to Stats Canada. And that gives you the weekly death counts. You can set the settings all the way back to 2014. And it's not until mid-2021, at least for British Columbia, that there's any noticeable increase in the deaths. So that's mid-summer for British Columbia, mid-summer of 2021, that there's a spike in the deaths. And the remarkable thing is that that is about 6 months after the rollout of the vaccines in British Columbia. So if you can post that, you can go through the Stats Canada statistics of the number of people dying each week in Canada. And if the pandemic started in 2020, there doesn't look to be anything in terms of the overall mortality rate in all of Canada that seems to indicate that there was anything unusual in 2020. In mid-2021 or in 2021, overall, things start to get higher than normal.
I don't want to debate a chart with you. I mean, I need time with
You don't need to debate the chart. People just need to look at the chart. People just need to look at the chart. They need to browse the data on their own.
Sorry, what I just mean is, like, to me, what jumps off the page is the pink line, and I'll attach this link to the episode show notes. That way, people can go and pull it up, and you see a spike in the pink right in what is this, week 11, March? It jumps, and then it jumps all the way higher than the rest of them. I mean, once again, without the visual for people to see, if you follow the pink line, which is 2020, I mean, it goes. It has about a, I don't know what that would be. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like a pretty big wave is what I would call it. I don't know what else to call it. And then you're right, it does trend a little higher than the rest of the lines. At least that's what it looks like to me. But like, just to get it thrown at me, Daniel, I've never been a stats guy.
So what I was looking at on my screen was just for British Columbia. But again, it's a little bit different in British Columbia than other places, right? If you switch the geography place of occurrence to British Columbia, you'll see quite a different graph.
Yes, it's almost in line.
Yeah, right, except for that one provisional in the summer of 2021. And then, you know what? Actually, I haven't looked at it recently. Let's look at the Alberta version, right? So Alberta seemed to have been hit hard in the winter of 2020. But again, what you're seeing, whether it's Canada-wide or just in British Columbia or just in Alberta, that is not consistent with a deadly pandemic. And it's shown in the numbers. You look at Alberta Health Services' own COVID death statistics. I'll send you that link.
Well, when I look at this, I go...
The mortality rate under the age of 40, it's statistically zero. It's zero is the mortality rate. It's 0.0004 is the mortality rate. That's not a deadly pandemic.
Yeah, you know, here I'm looking at these things. These are things that we were talking last night. This is things I'd love to delve into early on and then go. But looking at it, to me, it looks slightly higher. But if you look at numbers and everything else, what does slightly higher mean? To you, it means this isn't a deadly pandemic. A deadly pandemic should absolutely, no doubt, be whatever many times higher than the regular death rate every year. And once again, I'm just sitting here going, I look at it, and my eyes tell me right away it looks higher than the regular year. Now, if I filter it down to age group and everything else, yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, the average age of death in Alberta is 79. I don't think anybody, well, you can't argue that. It's right on Alberta's website. I got young kids, Daniel, and I argue all the time. Alberta's own website says they're more likely to die from influenza, the regular flu, than this. And on top of that, they're more than 5 times likely to get hurt from a fall than from COVID. So it's like, to young kids, this is nothing. And I would agree with that. As kids are getting sick, tons in schools right now and everything else, and we're pushing out a 5 to 11-year-old vaccine, which I've said adamantly on here makes zero sense to me. It makes beyond no sense to me, especially knowing that you get the vaccine and you don't stop spreading, you can't stop getting COVID, you just lessen the experience. Well, from what you're starting to talk about with vaccine injuries, side effects, that type of thing, and what other people said, maybe there's something there. I steer away from giving anyone any personal advice on the vaccine itself. When it comes to my kids, I see zero point of giving it to them when there's been, you want to talk about something that's just black and white. Uh, under the now, I mean, they're trying to change this. I think there's been one death under 19, and of course, we all saw in Alberta the 14-year-old who died from COVID, and then it came out that he'd been stage 4 cancer, and and that exploded in a hurry, and you feel for the kid's family.
So let's talk about the cancer thing just for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Because I want to put this in as simple terms as possible so that the message gets through. Nobody knows what the carcinogenicity of these mRNA vaccines are. What is the rate at which it increases chances of cancer? It took them 20 years to prove that glyphosate, Roundup, caused lymphomas. 20 years. This vaccine has not even been out for a full year yet. And you're taking an illness that has a 0% mortality for people under the age of 40. 0%, and I'm saying 0% as an estimate for the Alberta mortality under age of 40 is 0.0004%. You're taking something with an almost zero mortality and you're giving a new substance that might give them a cancer with 100% mortality. You're taking something that has almost zero chance of killing a person, and you're giving them an unknown substance that might give them a cancer that has 100% mortality. That is, I cannot describe how wrong that is. Well, I'll tell you in medical history, in Western medical history, going back to 1800s, maybe even before, at least 200 years of medical history. Doctors have never been forbidden from trying a medication. Never. Until hydroxychloroquine. And then pharmacists in British Columbia and Alberta were instructed to report on any physician that tried to give a patient hydroxychloroquine for anything other than lupus or rheumatoid arthritis or some kind of autoimmune disease. And then after hydroxychloroquine, it's ivermectin. There are 100 other drugs far more dangerous than ivermectin that any doctor can prescribe off-label for a use other than what Health Canada approved it for. But when it comes to COVID-19, you're not allowed to use that drug. Even when the side effects are minimal, in the case of hydroxychloroquine, and the side effects are practically absent. You can't find a drug with fewer side effects than ivermectin. And that brings us to another thing. The treatment of COVID-19. Basic medicine for like a viral pneumonia, any viral pneumonia, influenza, metapneumovirus, coronavirus, the regular coronavirus. If the virus is causing pneumonia, which is fluid in the lungs, then you give an antibiotic to prevent that fluid in the lungs from getting infected. You give inhalers to help oxygenate the lungs. And if the inflammation is really bad from the virus or whatever virus, you give some anti-inflammatory. For some reason, with this COVID-19, the only thing you're allowed to give is immunosuppressants, the anti-inflammatory, the prednisone or the dexamethasone. And that's what happened with these patients. I saw, once I finally got the medical records, because Alberta Health Services filed an official complaint about me to be investigated within their internal system. And because one of the pages I wrote orders for the patient, there was half a page blank, the doctor who came on to replace me, she wrote a bunch of orders on the bottom half of that page. So I got to see what happened to the patients after I left the building. She stopped the patient's vitamins, she stopped the patient's inhalers, and she stopped the patient's antibiotics. You wouldn't do that to any patient with any kind of viral pneumonia. And you certainly wouldn't show the complete disrespect for another doctor to stop vitamins that the doctor put the patient on. Even if you didn't believe the vitamins worked, you show that basic respect to another person with a medical degree. That if they put a patient on vitamins, you just leave them on the vitamins. She stopped the patient's vitamins. She stopped the patient's inhalers. She stopped the patient's antibiotic. No reasonable medical doctor would do that for any viral pneumonia.
So then what's going on? What's going on, Daniel? Because I don't, this is what the common person, myself, doesn't like. Listen, I have utmost faith in utmost faith in the hospital and its staff. They have done wondrous things. I got 3 young kids. We've been through there. We've dealt with that. Family members throughout time, etc. I find myself in a really tough place that I don't want to look at the hospital and its staff like they're a bunch of horrendous people, because I know they're all the amazing people that work there. What is going on then that you can?
Everything has changed with this COVID-19.
How so?
Basic things that we doctors are supposed to do with any viral pneumonia, we're not allowed to do. Basic things that we're allowed to make a decision together with the patient, that if there's some medication that there's evidence for, but it hasn't been officially approved by Health Canada, if you, the patient, want to try it and the doctor has adequate medical evidence to say, you know what, it's safe to try, you were allowed to do that. I was allowed to do that until this COVID-19 came along.
So you knew
all of the sudden, medical, scientific facts, scientific studies, study after study after study, are being ignored by Alberta Health Services executive, by the College of Physicians and Surgeons.
Well, speaking of Alberta, Jason Kenney, right? They just had an article come out saying why ivermectin is not used for COVID-19, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been official. It's been made official, Daniel. You're not allowed to use that medicine. I smile and I chuckle a little bit. With Merck coming out with their new early treatment drug, it sounds eerily familiar to what you would do with this. Knowing all
any
this,
drug, it takes 5 years to figure out whether or not that drug might increase rates of cancer. And 5 years is the minimum for early cancer rates. 10 years to figure out if a drug will increase cancer rates over the early moderate term. And it takes 20 years to figure out if something's going to cause long-term harm. Ivermectin's been around for 40 years. Why would you need to use anything different if you have ivermectin? Why would you need to test a new drug that has no track record?
Well, the simplest thing point to is money.
Yeah, there's a lot of money behind this.
Why that weekend in Rimby? I mean, you've been going for the 2 years previous that. Why ivermectin? Why then? Why try it?
Well, the patients were deteriorating. It wasn't like they were on the COVID ward and they were rounding the corner. They got a bunch of treatment from the regular doctor that was started when they showed up in the emergency department, and they were just gradually getting better and just waiting till their oxygen levels were high enough they could go home. That wasn't the situation. If that was the situation, I would stand back and I'd say, well, whatever the previous doctor was doing, it's doing its job. We'll just continue with that. I'm not here to change everything that the previous doctor, who usually works there in the community and who has to work there in the community after I'm gone, I'm not there to reinvent the wheel for them. If what they're doing is working, I show them the respect and let them continue doing what they're doing. But for 3 patients, what they were doing was not doing anything. In fact, it resulted in deterioration. So that's why I did my job.
Seems odd to be penalized for doing your job, doesn't it?
You know, if I was working in any of the usual places I work, where people know me and they know how much basic science that I'm always discussing with nurses, other doctors. I'm always bringing up scientific articles. No one would have batted an eye. I would have given patients ivermectin, and it's like, well, it's not recommended, but Daniel does it, and Daniel has his reasons. Dr. Daniel knows. Don't try to get into a debate with Dr. Daniel about the science. He'll bring up study after study after study. He's a nerd. He'll even talk to you about the chemistry, the basic chemistry, the biochemistry. He'll start talking on and on about reverse transcriptase. Anyhow, so yeah, Rimby was a new community. They didn't know me that well. But again, that's not an excuse to be sabotaging medications that the patient wants.
Well,
that's no excuse.
In the doctor world, in the pharmaceutical world, in the pharmacy, etc., the term ivermectin, the drug ivermectin, is there. To the common person, where I sit, what I find extremely troubling, and I can't get my head around, like I can't get my head around this, is like the amount of censorship going on doctors trying to talk out, like the absolute smear campaign. I just read a thing last night on you that says you don't exist, Rimby never happened, this guy is not alive, from a guy in our country, and I was like, oh, like that's pretty extreme. It's not saying that Daniel isn't, he got the events wrong or whatever. Like, it's trying to say you don't exist, which is wild to me. Now, take a step back. That's easy for me to say now as I sit here talking to you. But from the common person, the amount of censorship going on, like, I don't know the inner workings of a doctor and the prescriptions, the drugs you use, everything when you have a sick person come in. I just, and there's part of me that I just want to get healthy. I come in to see Daniel, just whatever you got to do, doc, just get me back up and running. Okay. But from where I sit, the amount of censorship that is happening right now is wild. The amount of push behind trying to discredit you and trying to get everybody to do one thing, and the one thing is get vaccinated tomorrow, is wild. And I can't Like the story you're telling me is going to cause, it probably already has in Alberta, right? Not riots, but like the amount of turmoil it's caused among the general population is a lot. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. Obviously, you should. Like, I mean, geez, you're in a profession that you just talked about what's happened, but the government doesn't want it. Doesn't want your story. Wants to bury it, and that is, as I sit here, is unnerving. Extremely unnerving.
I'd like everyone to look at the big picture. If the vaccine worked, you wouldn't need a vaccine passport. If the vaccine worked, there wouldn't be a fourth wave. And the fourth wave, that's something people just have to see for themselves on the alberta.ca COVID statistics. The fourth wave is almost as big as the third wave. If the vaccine worked, there wouldn't be a fourth wave. There might be a blip, but there wouldn't be a huge fourth wave.
Explain this to me. Why, if the vaccine worked, bring it down, expand on that thought for me.
Okay, basic high school biology. They teach evolution in Alberta high schools, right? Grade 12 biology.
Well, it's been a few years,
really
but
simple.
Yes.
We'll keep it really simple. Evolution is just about living things adapting to their environment. So, if you have 10% of people vaccinated, that means 90% of the environment that COVID-19 lives in is unvaccinated. So is there any reason for COVID-19 to develop resistance to a vaccine if only 10% of its environment has the vaccine? No, it's just going to continue being a regular old coronavirus. It doesn't need to develop vaccine resistance because 90% of its environment, 90% of people aren't vaccinated. So if one of those 10% of people walked outside and they've been vaccinated, 90% of the people they encounter will not have any vaccine-resistant coronaviruses. Their vaccine would still work. But what was the goal? They wanted 70% of Albertans to be vaccinated. Right? Some people were calling for 90% of people to be vaccinated. So what happens when you do that? You all of a sudden change the environment for the COVID-19 virus from 10% vaccinated to 90% vaccinated. What's a living thing going to do when its entire environment changes? Well, that coronavirus is going to be like, well, 90% of the environment I live in is vaccinated. I better get vaccine resistance. As simple as that. So by forcing everyone to get vaccinated, even if they don't need a vaccine, because they're under the age of 40, you just guaranteed that when one of those first 10%, those first elderly people who got vaccinated, you basically just guaranteed that when they walk outside and meet another person, the only coronaviruses they're going to see in the environment around them are vaccine-resistant ones. Mass vaccination guarantees mass resistance. And that's basic high school biology.
So if it's so basic, why did it get overlooked?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. How much money is behind this? How much political agenda is behind this? How much control do governments get when they can use a passport to control where you can go, what stores you can go into? You gotta ask questions.
Well, that's the thing. Right now, nobody wants you to ask questions, right? I was saying, to you before we started this, that I've been told I'm killing people by having these conversations, and I'm like, I don't know, man. You sit and listen to this. I'm, whether you do, you don't, you follow along, you don't. You got to make your choices for yourself. It's one of the things I love about my audience, Daniel, is I, no matter which podcast I listen to, no matter which guest I hear, I use critical thinking at all times to go, I like that, I didn't like that, and it continues to evolve my thinking on any subject, any scenario, etc. That's how I've lived my life, and I feel like that's how a lot of my audiences lived their lives. But to suggest that having conversations is dangerous, I think is a dangerous concept.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And one of the things that is so troubling is that there isn't more debate going on. Like for a year, for a year of this thing, I would say I look at my life as a small microcosm of Alberta, Canada, whatever you want, the level you go to, is I just avoided the subject because I just wanted, things are going to get better. Even though I saw some odd things going on in society, I'm like, things are going to get better. It's going to get better. It's going to get better. And the longer we go along here, I go, like, we've done a disservice by not talking about it, by not having experts come on and tell their stories, to have more debate out in the public eye so that we can get to the bottom of what's going on. Because I don't know how, I keep saying, like, in a year's time, are we out of this? 2 years' time, are we out of this? Like, what's the number?
Well, just think back to where we started. Could you imagine 18 months ago that the world we live in would be the way it is now? You need to get an injection to be able to go into a restaurant.
No, this is I tell this story all the time. My wife's from Minneapolis, so we drive down there. We come back. And by the time we get back, Alberta's come out and announced that the pandemic is endemic, that they're going to remove all restrictions, whatever. And I thought I went through, like, I can't explain the feeling to anyone because I turned my phone off. I just wasn't paying attention to Canada. I was just like, you know what? Going to go enjoy ourselves, etc. And so I was gone for, I don't know, 10 days, whatever it was. And when I came back and restrictions are all going and you're like, what happened? Where did I go? And then within a week, that was not the case. And now we're 6 weeks into, we're probably past 6 weeks into where we were. Now you got a vaccine passport, etc. And you're going, what are we doing? Like, even the most rational human being that has the vaccine right now is going like, this makes, honestly, I don't really care about this. Like, I don't know why we're doing this. Well, it's to protect everyone. I don't know. Right? Like, I don't know. These are giant questions that we haven't talked about near enough, and they just keep getting slammed down at us over and over and over again. I bring up, I was saying last night, like, the scary things that are happening all over again is we got a snitch line, both provinces. So if you see somebody acting out, not wearing their mask, once again, I'm not saying to do public disobedience. I'm just saying if things like that set you off, you can call a number and get them reported. Now, whether anyone comes and drags you off or comes and gives you a ticket, I have no idea. But the fact it's there is concerning. In North Battleford, they've announced, again, for the second year, an isolation facility for people who don't abide by the policies. Now, I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek because you know, maybe I am being a little bit extreme, but we do have an isolation facility that's an hour from me. I'm like, come on. That's a little bit concerning, isn't it? Why am I the only guy that's concerned about that? Like that seems like a
Hmm.
wild idea.
It's not wild. It's reality. It's not wild at all. It's reality. And the best thing you can do is, the best thing everyone can do is think logically, ask questions, read about history, read about law, read about science, and keep asking why. Keep following that trail. Because that's how we get out of this.
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope
This
what you just said is the absolute truth. If nobody takes anything else from this sit down, this chat, that right there is what I hope everybody holds on to, because that's where I'm at. The only way out of this is by continuing to talk about it, because one way or another, I'm either going to stumble on this is the worst thing in human history in the sense that it is killing everybody and get the injection and hold on, Dorothy, because Kansas is going bye-bye, or this is maybe the worst thing, public blindness to what's actually going on is actually happening right in front of us, and nobody's willing to admit it. And I can't, like, Daniel, even after you talk for an hour and tell me your entire story, I go, I'm not a dog. Like, I'm trying to rationalize everything in my brain at all times. I'm like, well, I'm not, you know, he's from out of town, and, you know, and I'm doing all
do you
this.
want to talk science? I
Yeah,
love talking about science
sure.
because it makes me happy. Because, okay,
Let's talk about
we're
science.
going from high school biology to
Sure.
first year university freshman biology.
Okay.
So this is genetics 101. This is basic genetics. Okay. So it was the 1600s. There was a Gregorian monk, Mendel, and he did all these experiments with pea plants. So basically, just to make it as short as possible, he had some red flowering pea plants, some white flowering pea plants, and he crossed them together, and then he got pink flowers. So when you have a generation of pink flowers, one of the things he experimented with is, can I make pure red flowers or pure white flowers from pink flowers? And what do I need to do to the pink flowers to get pure red or pure white? One of the experiments he did was called a back cross. So you had a pink flower, and then you bred it with either a pure red flower or a pure white flower. When you did that, you started to get pure red flowers or pure the genotype, which is the actual genes, and the phenotype, which is what the actual plant or the expression of the genes, what it actually acts like. So let's get to the coronavirus. So in nature, no virus gets an advantage from being deadly because you kill your host. And then if your host dies and you're a virus, you die too. So there's no evolutionary reason for a virus, no matter how deadly that virus starts off as, there's no motive for that virus to stay deadly. Every generation, the virus wants to get milder and milder and milder and more contagious, right? And the virus's ultimate goal is to be as of little inconvenience to you as possible. It doesn't even want you to stay in bed feeling sick. What the virus wants is you to go around to all your friends' houses, have a little bit of sniffle, but be otherwise 99.9%. Because then the virus is in its happy zone. You're mostly healthy, and it gets to spread to a lot of people. So let's apply that principle to the Wuhan coronavirus 19. It might have started off super deadly, but if you left nature alone, nature herself will make that virus not deadly. You just have to give nature a bit of time, and that will happen through natural evolution. Now let's get back to this idea of Mendel's back cross. So what do you have with this vaccine? You have a segment of mRNA, which is the virus's version of DNA. And it's not the mRNA from the mild virus after 100,000 generations of becoming milder through evolution. You have the genetic segment of the original, deadlier Wuhan virus. So what happens if someone who got the vaccine, who has that segment of RNA coding for the spike protein from the original deadly Wuhan virus, and you breed that with the mild virus that evolves through nature after a year, you get a re-expression of the original phenotype, which is the original deadliness of the original Wuhan virus. That is a genetic back cross. It's not a complete back cross because the segment of RNA you're getting in the mRNA vaccines, it's not the whole coronavirus genome. It's just the spike protein part. But genetically, theoretically, molecularly, that is effectively a Mendelian back cross. So you are recreating the original Wuhan deadly strain of virus because you're putting in a segment of RNA that is from the original strain and you're breeding it with the mild strain. People need to think about that. Everyone with a biology degree needs to think about that. Scientifically, theoretically, molecularly, everything about what we're doing, injecting people with mRNA, it doesn't make sense. Let's talk about more science. I love science. Okay. Let's talk about evolution of viruses. Okay, we're getting into second year university biology degree stuff. So, let's say you have a virus. You get COVID-19. Okay? It goes in through your nose, your lungs, and your body starts making antibodies to it, right? And your body makes antibodies to every part of the virus because your body got exposed to the whole virus. And the other thing that happens if you get exposed to COVID-19 and you get sick with it is everyone has a little bit of mucus in their lungs. And what that mucus does is it traps everything you breathe in throughout the day. Mold, bacteria, dust, everything, right? A little bit of that gets trapped in the mucus. And then when you go to sleep, that mucus gets pushed by cilia, little hairs in your lungs. It gets pushed out of your lungs. And most of the time, people don't wake up in the middle of the night and cough out the mucus. They actually swallow it. So basically, all the stuff you breathe in through the day, mold, bacteria, viruses, it ends up in your stomach. And your stomach starts digesting it. And then it goes to your duodenum where you have more enzymes that digest it some more. But here's where the magic of the human body happens. In your digestive system, you have a lymphatic system. It's called the GALT, the gut-associated lymphatic tissue. And it takes all those little bits of digested mold, digested bacteria, digested viruses, so broken up viruses, and it starts making antibodies to them. So when you have a natural infection, you get antibodies to the outside of the virus, and when your digestive system is done digesting the virus, you have antibodies to digested bits of the virus, thanks to your intestines. So you get a natural infection, you have antibodies to every part of that coronavirus. So if a coronavirus mutates and it changes its outside coat, you still have antibodies to the insides of the coronavirus. changing its skin won't matter for you. Your immunity is to every version of that coronavirus. Now, let's look at this vaccine. The vaccine is a coding segment for just one protein on the outside of that coronavirus, the spike protein. So if your body makes antibodies to just one part of the outside of the coronavirus, then all the coronavirus has to do is change that one part, and then it's 100% infective again. Because the vaccine doesn't give you complete immunity to the outside of the coronavirus, the inside of the coronavirus, the broken up parts of the coronavirus. It just gives you antibodies to one part. Natural immunity is also immunity to variants. You're not going to get that from a vaccine.
You're pushing a lot of buttons this morning, good sir. You know? I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that in the sense that I mean that in the sense that this was always a big issue when it started. I mean, last year when it came down and things shut down, everybody perked up, holy man, what's going on, right? But as we're 18 months into this thing, maybe even a little over that, and we're on to vaccine passports and trying to go that way of trying to control this thing, it's not a simple answer how we get out of this. Because if everything you just said about the vaccine spurring on, and you're not the first person that I've read or heard from say this, that as you press on it, you can create variations because it wants to survive. I've heard people argue that 100%, if we could get to 100% vaccination rate, then we'd stop this. And then I've had other people come on, and I've had listeners say it's rather enjoyable if you don't listen to the podcast for a couple weeks and then go through a bunch of people, how they contradict each other, because everybody argues different things, which is extremely interesting, and why we needed to have some debate about all these things early on instead of just sitting back and whatever else. Some of these arguments, Daniel, have been going on for a very, very long time. Like, I'm a history guy. I like history. I like reading. So I picked up a book on, medical, basically on vaccine, the ethics of vaccines, because you understand by injecting a healthy population with a vaccine, there's people in that population that you could do ill harm to. That's, comes back to this. If you're a political leader and you have 1 million people and you're about to have 10,000 die from a deadly virus or virus, whatever we want to call it, whatever word you want to associate with it, or you can give them a vaccine and now you eliminate that down to 2,500. Well, what do you do, right? Like the moral grounds for what do you do? And what if the 2,500, though, are all healthy people? Is that okay? And the other 10, right? Like this moral dilemma. Well, anyways, the reason I bring this up is I've been reading about this, and I didn't realize it started back in the 1720s is where, and maybe it's even earlier than that. The book starts at 1720s. So for 300 years, we've been arguing about the collective versus the individual. And when I hear you talking about all these different things with the vaccine, a lot of these things they bring up, they talk about. They talk about the different issues and the different moral dilemmas that have plagued not only healthcare workers, but specifically vaccine builders, manufacturers, on how do you implement this the right way, because it's a brilliant technology. I mean, unless you're going to tell me differently about some of the, the tetanus, the polio, I don't know. I'm sure I'm missing diphtheria. I'm sure I'm missing like 10 out there. Is it
You know,
not a beautiful tool in the tool belt?
it's
But
amazing.
but
Let's talk
the
about some more second year biology and
Sure.
immunology, second year biology degree. Because the more you know about science, the more you learn about nature, the more respect you have for nature, and the more amazing you realize the human body is, the more amazing the natural world is. So remember what I was talking about, viruses coming in through your nose and your airways
Yes.
and being digested? When something bad gets into the body remembers where it came from. So if the port of entry was your nose or your lungs, your body first makes IgM antibodies, IgG antibodies, and then for the last step, because whatever that was bad came in through the nose or the digestive system or the lungs, it makes IgA antibodies. And IgA antibodies are special because those are little antibodies that your body sticks into the surface of your nose, the surface of your lungs. Any part of you that's wet can hold IgA antibodies, and they stick out of your mucosa. So that means if you're walking around and you have IgA antibodies in your nose and your lungs, and you walk into a cloud of coronavirus, if those IgA antibodies are adapted to fight off that coronavirus, your lungs will stop that coronavirus even before it gets into the blood. It'll stop it at the surface of your skin. In fact, if you have a whole bunch of IgA antibodies and you walk into a cloud of COVID-19 and you have COVID-19 IgA antibodies, you take a big breath in, you're actually cleaning the air because your lungs are pulling those coronavirus particles out of the air because the coronavirus particles get stuck to the IgA antibodies on the surface of your lungs. But if an infection or something bad shows up in the blood first, your body only makes IgM antibodies and then IgG antibodies. It never makes IgA antibodies. So the first sign that there was something weird going on, something malicious going on in the doctor, science, biology, vaccine world was when, this is when I noticed it, Vancouver Coastal Health implemented a vaccine mandate for the flu vaccine. And it said everyone had to get the flu vaccine if you were a hospital employee in Vancouver Coastal Health. And then the nurses union, the BC Nurses Union, made such a big human rights case against it that you're forcibly injecting someone as a condition of their employment. Vancouver Coastal Health backed off a little. They said you either had to get the flu vaccine or wear a mask for the entire flu season. No injection influenza vaccine can make you have IgA antibodies, because when it goes in as an injection, your body's like, whoa, this bad thing just showed up in the blood. We only need to make IgM and IgG antibodies, which hang out in the blood. So then why was Vancouver Coastal Health trying to push an injection vaccine on all the nurses and all the doctors, knowing full well that an injection vaccine cannot prevent transmission? Because the antibodies are in the blood. You can still get a surface infection of influenza. You just won't feel that very sick because as soon as it goes past the surface, it'll go into the blood and then it gets stopped in its tracks. But the rationale that Vancouver Coastal Health gave, that the reason why they were forcing everyone or trying to force everyone to get the influenza vaccine was because it would stop outbreaks of influenza in Vancouver Coastal Health hospitals. And if you look at the stats, it really didn't stop any outbreaks of influenza. There was just as many outbreaks of influenza. There was, for a while, an inhaled flu vaccine. It was called Flunase. And in spite of the fact that that was the one flu vaccine, the one influenza vaccine that could prevent transmission, because it went in as a nasal spray through the nose, which means the final antibody that the body makes will be the IgA antibody, the one that cleans the air, the one that stops the infection the minute it touches the wet surface of your nose or the wet surface of your lungs. That was pulled off the market. The one influenza vaccine that would produce the type of antibody that would actually prevent transmission of influenza was taken off the market. And the only influenza vaccines out there are injection ones that won't give you the antibody that prevents transmission. Second year biology, university biology, second year. We're not even talking master's degree biologies or PhDs in biology.
What's our way out of this? Is there a way out of this?
Asking lots of questions, learning about the natural world, learning about history, learning about politics, learning about the law. You gotta just, like, it really is an awakening. Because, you know, I love reading science. I can read science all day. But really opening my eyes was just as you were doing, reading about history. History going all the way back to Plato. Philosophy, politics, and law. Reading law is like pulling teeth. But I had to read that judgment that Justice Adam Germain put on Christopher Scott from the Whistle Stop Cafe.
Okay.
Oh, there's a lot of material in there, and it's not good. Like, the mental and logical gymnastics that judge did to justify his sentence for the owner of a small truck stop in a small town in Alberta. It just makes me shake my head.
You're telling me something. What happened to the owner of the truck stop at the Whistle Stop Cafe? I obviously have missed something here.
So he got sentenced for contempt of court. And in his sentence for contempt of court, Judge Adam Germain fined him $20,000 and ordered him to pay almost $11,000 in court costs to Alberta Health Services. But here's the dystopian thing. Justice Germain, I'm just going to pull it up because this is so frightening that I have to do it the justice and actually tell you what Justice Germain ordered Christopher Scott to say. So, you know about freedom of speech, right?
Yes.
This justice goes way past restricting freedom of speech. Okay? This justice says the final term of his probation order, his as in Christopher Scott, the owner of Whistle Stop, will be that when he is exercising his right of free speech and speaking against AHS health orders and AHS recommendations in a public gathering or public forum, he must indicate in his communications the following. I am also aware the views I am expressing to you on this occasion may not be views held by the majority of medical experts in Alberta. While I may disagree with them, I am obliged to inform you that the majority of medical experts favor social distancing, mask wearing, and avoiding large crowds to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Most medical experts also support participation in a vaccination program unless for a valid religious or medical reason you cannot be vaccinated. Vaccinations have been shown statistically to save lives and reduce the severity of COVID-19 symptoms. Christopher Scott, a truck stop and gas station owner, has to put that paragraph into every social media post he posts. That's way more than restricting freedom of speech. That is making a court order for compelled speech. Compelled speech. You know where compelled speech happens? In fascist states. And here it is, a judge in Alberta is doing just that.
Can you send me that
Never
link?
mind the
Can you
fact
send me
that,
that link as well, Daniel?
Yeah, I'm gonna send it to you. This is Canley. Let me make sure this judge has a few decisions that this is how tyranny starts. This is exactly how tyranny starts, right? And what was it? Vaccinations have been shown statistically to save lives and reduce the severity of COVID-19 symptoms. Well, if you look at any of the Alberta statistics, vaccinations do not statistically save lives. You look at the Alberta Health Services, so I'm going to send you, I'll probably be resending you. This is the Alberta.ca official statistics on deaths from COVID-19. So if you scroll down the page, it is table 17, and it shows daily COVID-19 attributed deaths. So in the peak of the third wave, which looks to be about January 1st or 2nd, there was about 30 deaths. On the day that it was the peak, there was 30 deaths a day attributed to COVID-19. The peak from this fourth wave that we've gone through, it looks like the highest number of deaths they had per day was on October the 26th, and that was 26 people died. So looking at this, just eyeballing it, there does not look to be any statistical difference between the peak of the third wave and the peak of the fourth wave. But the peak of the third wave was before full vaccination. So Albertans have been 70% vaccinated since June. So 3 months after 70% vaccination, you have a fourth wave that looks to be about the same as the third wave. And the third wave was before the vaccination, and this fourth wave is basically after the vaccination. And this judge says that it's been statistically proven. That is false. Vaccinations have been shown statistically to save lives. That's what he says. And he put that decision up on October the 15th, which means if he had looked on the Alberta.ca website, he would have seen that on October the 2nd, so almost 2 weeks before his decision, that the peak of deaths in the fourth wave is almost exactly the same as the peak of deaths in the third wave. And yet this judge tells Christopher Scott that he has to say in his social media posts that the vaccination's been statistically proven to save lives. That is a lie. A judge is telling a truck stop owner to tell a lie as a part of his sentence for having contempt of court. This is more than a doctor problem. Sean, this is a judicial problem as well. It's more than like a doctor prescribing ivermectin problem. It's a problem of like the entire College of Physicians and Surgeons violating a patient's right to choose what medication they take.
You know,
And then it's even bigger than the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta taking away your right to choose your medication as a patient. Now it's a judicial problem where justices in Alberta, judges, are telling people that they must speak falsehoods as a condition of their sentence. This is a historical problem. This is big, Sean.
Well, I'm going to implore people that are listening once again to do what they're probably doing if they've been listening to this point, Daniel. That is to get on the websites, take a look at the numbers for themselves, read, ask questions, be polite to one another. One of the most difficult things I see right now is the way we treat one another, and it's tough. It's I'm sitting here as proof of it. It's tough. People want you to walk and talk a certain way right now, and that's a lot of that is fear driven. There's a lot of there's good people everywhere, and the loss of empathy to see things from each and everyone's perspective it seems to be lost right now. And I think as you get to the end of this chat, if you got questions, if you want to go look at the data, I got all these links from Daniel. I'll put them up so people can go take a look at the numbers for themselves if they haven't been on the Alberta Health, if they haven't been on on StatsCan. I'll post a bunch of links in the episode notes. That way, people can take a look for themselves and see if they agree or disagree. And I'm sure I'll hear about it, Daniel. The text line will be open, and I'm sure people will be wanting to let us know all about it. Regardless, I appreciate you coming on. It's these conversations. I don't know what I'm having a harder time wrapping my brain around. One is the information you just given me again every time I sit down with somebody who makes you think about such prevalent big picture things that go in the face of what's being said everywhere. Or the fact that I'm now starting to get harassment on myself from just having conversations because, these are difficult conversations that affect everyone in my circle, everyone in my city, my area, and they're hard. This is not, let's go to the Oiler game and hopefully they win the Stanley Cup. This is something on a much grander scale. This is big picture things that a lot of people probably have turned their brain off to, honestly, right? They've been vaccinated or they haven't been vaccinated, right? There's people that just like, fuck it, I'm not getting it. And they just walk around and they don't give a fuck anymore. And then there's the other side. There's people that have been vaccinated that thought that was the end of it. And now we're just walking around. And they don't care anymore. Just let me go back to life. It's all I want is go back to life. And
you mentioned something so interesting, people turning their brains off. In the last week of
keeping your brain on is tiring.
Yes.
Is absolutely tiring.
It's really exciting, though. I'm going to tell you something. It'll blow your mind. It'll blow your mind because you see it everywhere. Okay. Last week of medical school, I took a medical hypnosis course. Okay. It was put on by an emergency doctor in Dalhousie in Halifax, right? And it's how to like hypnotize kids so that they don't get as nervous or they don't flinch as much when you're giving them, a local anesthetic to stitch up a cut. But one of the things he taught in his medical hypnosis course is that You need repetition to get people hypnotized. So to get them to turn off their brain, to turn off the thinking part of their brain. So it's like the swinging pendulum. That's one form of repetition. But you can also do verbal repetition. And then once someone is hypnotized, if you want to give them a hypnotic suggestion, so you want to program their subconscious through hypnosis, you have to use a certain type of language. And the best I can describe that language is it's command language. It's short phrases. It's simple language. And it's very direct. So, and this is the weird thing. I remember this from like, this was 2004, so this is almost 20 years ago. I'm seeing command language again. And I see it all over the hospital. It's like wherever I'm going, there's all these stickers on the wall, stickers on the floor. And they're all the same. They say, do your part, wear a mask, do your part, get the vaccine, or stop the spread. And it's just everywhere. The same repetitive phrase followed by a command. Stop the spread. And then it's something like, wash your hands. Stop the spread, wear a mask. Stop the spread, get the vax, right? But the repetitive phrase is always the same. And it's all over the hospital walls. And I'm like, wait a minute. If you look at it from like a hypnosis kind of point of view, they're trying to repeat that same phrase over and over and over again to shut off your frontal lobes, the part of your brain that's like, why is that there? Why is that saying that? Right? Because it's so repetitive, it just bores the hell out of your thinking part of the brain. And then it always seems to be that after that short repetitive phrase, there's some kind of command. Do this, do that. And I'm like, wait a minute. Is that intentional? Is that command language intentionally being used?
At this point, you have to assume it's intentional.
Yeah.
They put the amount of time and resources put into this entire thing is hard to comprehend. Honestly, it's worldwide. It's everywhere. This isn't little old Alberta town. This isn't Canada. This is everywhere. Like this is a very big, you can't just walk across the border to BC and you're out of this. You can't just walk into Edmonton and you're out of this. This is everywhere right now.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you coming on, Daniel. This has been, once again, I wish the connection had been a little better, so we could have had video for you, but we'll keep you anonymous so that people can't see your face. Regardless, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story with me. Once again, I find myself at the end of these conversations, the brain's just tired. I just need to think about things again, all over again. And I want people to, I got a bunch of critical thinkers that are listening this far in. I just want them to continue to do exactly what you said. Ask questions, read, go to this website, see the data, continue just to do some critical thinking, but be polite about it. I don't think we need to destroy our humanity, because there's a lot of good people on both sides of this argument, and I certainly know a lot of them. But I appreciate you coming on. Before I let you go, I do a little segment at the end. It's the final question, brought to you by Crude Master Transport. Just a couple quick questions. One is always for the guy who sits across from me. Who would you want to sit across from and pick their brain?
Oh, good question. I don't want to sit across from Plato himself, and I want to pick his brain. Absolutely.
You want to go back a couple thousand years?
Yeah, it's amazing, like the stuff he talks about. You're like, what? How does he know about that? That seems like oddly familiar to the 20th century.
How it transcends time.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of authors that have that ability. I mean, you've mentioned dystopian, and I just think of Orwell, you know. He some of the things he's wrote have just were terrifying to read, and now you just see it playing out everywhere, it feels like. And that's a guy from not even 100 years ago, and it seems to have transcended across the decades to where we sit now. But you're right. You go back in time, you pick up an artist or an author, especially a guy like Plato. I mean, you can rattle off a bunch that are in the similar grouping of him, and it they seem like prophets almost, right? Just their ability
Hmm.
to see what was going on in the larger of society and talk about it. That would be a fantastic guest. Um, what the other thing I'm always curious about is what are you watching for in the coming months? Like what are you keeping tabs on?
So I think, what's really fascinating is trying to predict the future, right? And then I think, well, what about physics? Like, physics is like you predict where a ball is going to land because you throw it and you can see the trajectory it takes. And you know from the present and then how it moves through time, you can predict where that ball will land. Can you do the same thing, the same prediction based on trajectory? Can you do the same thing with events in society? So then early on, when this vaccine came out, it looked to me like the first 4 months were voluntary vaccines, right? It was January, February, March, April. And then the next step was incentives, right? So everyone who was voluntary, they lined up and they got their vaccine January, February, March, April. But then May, June, July, August seemed to be all about incentives, right? So there was that lottery, and then there was that $100 whatever. You just get $100 for getting an injection. And then so, well, what would be, so this was maybe about mid July, mid August. And I'm like, okay, well, if 4 months was voluntary and this summer is the 4 months of incentives, what happens after incentives? Well, if you really want people to take the injection, then it's coercion, right? Because you have the voluntary, that's the easiest. Incentives costs a bit of money. But then if you're really desperate to make people get the injection, the next step up from that is coercion. And look at that. Starting in September, October, we're being coerced to take an injection. Right? And so if you follow the same trajectory, 4 months was voluntary, 4 months was incentives, and right now we're in the 4 months of coercion. What's the next 4 months? January, February, March, April of 2022. That's a dystopian trajectory.
Well,
That is dystopian right
well,
there.
there's only one way to find out, and that is to walk the path, and we'll find out here in a few months what comes of it and what comes down the chute, won't we?
Yeah.
Well, I really
Yeah.
appreciate you hopping on with me at this early hour, and just tell me a little bit about yourself and your story, Daniel. It's once again, it's if nothing else, it's thought provoking to give the brain something to chew on for I'm sure the next week for myself on thinking about some things. So, thanks again for hopping on, and yeah, stay safe wherever you're at.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. I really I enjoy talking with people from all walks of life, right? And you know, you can tell from how much I read science, I don't have much time to watch hockey. So actually, I kind of gave up on hockey when Vancouver Canucks almost won the Stanley Cup against the New York. was the New York Rangers, I think, at that time. There was big riots in Vancouver after that loss.
Boston Bruins. You lost to the Boston Bruins in the Stanley Cup Final in Game 7.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again.
Yes, thank you. Have a good day.
Hey, folks. Thanks for joining us today. If you just stumbled on the show, please click subscribe. Then scroll to the bottom and rate and leave a review. I promise it helps. Remember, every Monday and Wednesday, we will have a new guest sitting down to share their story. The Sean Newman Podcast is available for free on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you get your podcast fix. Until next time.